6 words in Greek, maybe 4 in Hebrew, spoken inside a room you could cross in 3 steps by a woman whose name nobody outside her village had ever heard. We put those words on Christmas cards. We set them to choral music. We carve them into cathedral marble. But if you were standing in that room, if you were the one saying them, those words wouldn't sound like music. They would sound like the bolt sliding shut on the last door between you and ruin. Mary knew what she was saying yes to. She understood the cost the way you understand fire when you've been burned. And she said it anyway. This is the story of what those words actually meant, not in theology, but in the daily physical, survivable reality of a woman living under Roman occupation in a village where everyone could hear you breathe. Mary didn't grow up in a vacuum. She grew up inside a legal system, and she knew its rules the way a fisherman knows the currents. Every Shabbat Torah was read aloud at the Nazareth synagogue. The readings cycled through the 5 books of Moses across the year. Mary had been hearing them since she was a small child sitting on her mother's lap. By her early 20s, she had heard the full cycle over a dozen times. She knew Deuteronomy. Specifically, she knew chapter 22. Verses 20 through 21 describe the procedure for a bride found not to be a virgin. She could be brought to the door of her father's house, and the men of the city would stone her to death. So you shall purge the evil from among you. Now, context matters here. By the 1st century, actual execution by stoning had become extremely rare. The Romans had largely removed the authority of local Jewish courts to carry out capital punishment, with specific limited exceptions. And within Jewish legal tradition itself, the conditions for execution had been restricted to the point where it was almost never carried out. The Talmud, compiled later, but reflecting attitudes that were evolving during Mary's lifetime, would record the opinion that a court that executed one person in 70 years was considered destructive. So Mary was probably not afraid of being stoned to death. That's important to establish honestly. But here's what she was afraid of, and had every reason to be afraid of everything short of death. In a village of 200 people, social death didn't require a trial. The anthropologist Bruce Molina, whose work on first-century Mediterranean social dynamics has shaped an entire generation of biblical scholarship, describes these communities as organized around a single axis: honor and shame. Honor was not an internal feeling. It was a public resource granted by the community, maintained through behavior and destroyed through public perception. A woman's honor was defined almost entirely by 2 things: her sexual conduct and her compliance with community expectations. A betrothed woman who became pregnant before the Nisuin, regardless of the explanation, triggered a cascade of consequences that touched every member of her family. Her father's honor damaged. The man who was supposed to guard his daughter's virtue had failed. He would sit at the synagogue under the unspoken judgment of every man who knew. Her mother's honor destroyed. The woman who was supposed to teach her daughter, supervise her behavior, keep her safe. She had failed in the most visible way possible. At the well, the other women would know. They would always know. Her siblings' marriage prospects compromised. In a system where family honor determined who would marry whom, a sister's scandal stained every brother and sister beneath her, and Mary herself. If Joseph chose to divorce her publicly, which was his legal right, she would be returned to her father's house as a rejected, disgraced pregnant woman with almost no prospect of remarriage. In an economy where women depended entirely on their connection to a male household for survival, this was not an abstract consequence. It was a practical death sentence played out slowly over years of increasing poverty and marginalization. This is what Mary was calculating when she opened her mouth to answer Gabriel. Not theology, survival. Read Luke 1:26-38 carefully and notice what Gabriel does not say. He does not say Joseph will understand. He does not say your family will believe you. He does not say the village will accept this. He does not say you will be protected from consequences. He announces what will happen. You will conceive and bear a son. And he explains the divine mechanism, the Holy Spirit will come upon you. He mentions Elizabeth as a sign. Your relative Elizabeth has also conceived a son in her old age. And then he waits. He waits for Mary's answer, and he waits without offering a safety net. This is the detail that gets lost in 2,000 years of gilded paintings and hymns. Gabriel did not offer Mary a plan for managing the aftermath. He did not explain how she would navigate the Arusin, the village gossip, the legal exposure, or Joseph's inevitable reaction. He delivered the announcement. He answered her one practical question, and he waited for a yes or a no. Mary was being asked to say yes to a future in which her pregnancy would be visible before her wedding. The father of her child would not be her husband. Her only explanation would be a story that no one in her village, no one in her entire cultural tradition had any framework to believe. She would be carrying this alone. Gabriel wasn't staying. He would leave the room, and Mary would be standing there with nothing but her own word, the word of a peasant woman in a village where a woman's word was worth less than a man's testimony in court. That's the offer. Take it or leave it. Luke 1:38. Idou hedula Kyriou, genoito moi kata tu remasu. Behold the servant of the Lord. Let it be to me according to your word. Let's take it apart, word by word. Idou, behold, or look, an attention marker. She is not mumbling, she is announcing. She is saying what I am about to tell you I mean. Hedula Kyriou, the female slave of the Lord. The word doul is the feminine form of doulos. A doulos was not a hired servant, not an employee, not a willing helper. A doulos was property, a human being who belonged to another human being, or in this case, to God. Mary is not using polite self-deprecation. She is using the most extreme term available to describe total subordination. In a society stratified by honor, where your position was everything, where your family's reputation determined your access to food, marriage, community, and safety, Mary deliberately placed herself at the absolute bottom, below the village women, below the beggars, at the level of a slave. And from that position, from the floor, in every sense, she said yes. Genoito, let it happen, or may it be. This is the optative mood. In Koine Greek, the optative was already rare, dying out of everyday speech by the 1st century, but it survived in formal, deliberate, intentional expressions. The optative doesn't express inevitability. It doesn't mean I can't stop this, so fine. It expresses genuine desire, genuine consent. I want this to happen. This is the linguistic precision that 2,000 years of tradition have blurred. Mary was not surrendering. She was not bowing to force. She was choosing, actively, deliberately. with full understanding of the cost. Kata Teremasu, according to your word. She is binding herself to what Gabriel has said, not to what she hopes will happen, not to what she thinks might happen, to the specific, concrete, terrifying thing that was just announced. A child, a pregnancy, without a human father, in a village that will do the math. 6 words, 21 syllables. The most expensive sentence any woman in the ancient world ever spoke. Let's count the cost, not in theological terms, in human terms. The first cost: isolation. From the moment her pregnancy became visible, Mary would be the subject of the village's most intense scrutiny. Not curiosity judgment. 200 people, one well, one synagogue, 0 privacy. Every morning at the spring she would feel the shift in conversation as she approached the sudden quiet, the averted eyes, the resumed chatter after she passed. Not once, every morning, for months. The second cost: her mother. Anna had spent Mary's entire life teaching her the rules, how to behave, how to preserve honor, how to be a good daughter and a good wife. Mary's pregnancy would look to Anna like a failure of everything she had taught. Whether Anna eventually believed Mary's explanation or not, the initial impact would have been devastating. The daughter she raised pregnant before the wedding, with a story that sounded like the worst kind of excuse. The third cost: Joseph. Mary was legally bound to a man who had spent months building her a house with his own hands, stone by stone, beam by beam, a room built on the assumption that his wife would come to him honorably in the proper time, in the proper way. And instead this, a pregnancy, not his, with an explanation that asked him to believe something no man in the history of Israel had ever been asked to believe. Matthew 1:19 tells us Joseph's reaction. He decided to divorce her quietly. Not publicly, he was. Matthew says, a just man, and he didn't want to expose her to public disgrace. But he was going to end it. The house he built would stand empty. The future he'd constructed stone by stone would be dismantled with a get-a-bill of divorce signed by 2 witnesses. The fourth cost: the permanent stain. Even if everything eventually worked out, even if Joseph stayed, even if the wedding happened, even if the child was born, the whisper would never fully die. In a village of 200 people, institutional memory is long. Remember when Mary was pregnant before the wedding. Remember the story she told. That whisper would follow her for the rest of her life. It would follow her son. It would follow them all the way to a synagogue in Nazareth 30 years later, where the hometown crowd would say about Jesus, "Isn't this the tecton's son?" with an emphasis on tectons that carried the weight of everything they had always suspected. Mary knew all of this. Standing in that room looking at Gabriel, she knew. So why did she say yes? This is the question that has generated 2,000 years of theology, devotion, art, music, and argument. And the honest answer is, Luke doesn't tell us why. He records what she said, not why she said it. Her internal reasoning, her motivation, her thought process, her private negotiation between fear and faith is not in the text. What we can say is what the text shows us. It shows us a woman who understood the legal system she lived inside because she had heard it read aloud every Shabbat of her life. It shows us a woman who asked a practical question, how will this happen? Which means she was thinking clearly, not overwhelmed. It shows us a woman who chose the most extreme possible term for herself, dual slave, which means she understood the magnitude of what she was agreeing to. It shows us a woman who used the optative mood genuito, which means her yes was not forced. It was desired, and it shows us a woman who was alone. No advisor, no committee, no support group, no one standing beside her saying, "You should do this," or "You can handle this." Just a girl in a room with a question that required an answer and no time to convene a council. She answered, alone, in the dark, with full knowledge that the light waiting outside that doorway was going to burn. We tell this story as if the hard part was the angel showing up. It wasn't. Angels are impressive, but they leave. The hard part was what came after the silence, the solitude, the slow grinding reality of living inside a decision that no one around you understands. Mary's yes was not a single moment. It was a commitment to 1,000 moments that would follow, each one harder than the last. The morning she told her mother. The day Joseph found out. The walk past the well. The whispers at the synagogue. The slow public unraveling of the reputation she had spent her entire life building. She agreed to all of it, in advance, with her eyes open, in a room the size of a closet. That's not the yes of someone who doesn't understand the question. That's the yes of someone who has counted every cost weighed, every consequence stared every loss in the face, and decided that the thing she was being asked to carry was worth more than everything she was about to lose. 6 words, 21 syllables, and every one of them was paid for in full.